So as promised, here's a full demo, and this could be one of the most important demos you ever watch, and I can't take any credit for this. This is purely Edward Seago's design and his technique, as far as I can tell, his technique, and that's what we're going to do by doing this master study, and we can look at perhaps what was going through his mind at the time. So one of the big things for me about Edward Seago is how he connected shapes up, so stick around, and that's what we'll look at later on in the video. Is my goal to be able to paint confidently outdoors, and I'm sure some artists, watercolour artists, do wet the paper outdoors, but the biggest issue I find when I'm outdoors painting is waiting for the paper to dry. Now, I don't have a hairdryer outdoors, so the last thing I think I would want to do is wet the paper. So we can paint over the houses because that's all going to be darker. So I just want to get this warmth. That's some yellow ochre in there. I can just put a little bit of spray on there so I don't get any hard edges. And what should we take? A bit of cobalt blue. And also it's trickier to, well, you can't, if you wet the whole paper, get this white paper left behind. But I've achieved now to have wet paper, so I can do all the wet into wet stuff. And you know, I could use this, paint this method outdoors on location. But so now that's one of the big questions I get asked a lot is, you know, do I wet the paper first? And the answer to that is no. I shall just give that top another little spray, and I'll put the water in, and then I'll come back and put some clouds in, but just give this water a chance to soak into the paper. So back to that yellow ochre. Again, don't want to go too dark with that. And if you do go too dark, just wash it off a little bit. White paper almost there. And then in with the blue. But it's literally just putting a little stain on the paper there. No more than that. And could maybe just touch a bit of burnt sienna, and I'll just grey that off a little bit in there so it doesn't compete with the sky. And then I shall take, you could do it with the Skoda Ultimo, but I can take this Skoda Versatile size 10 and some ultramarine blue, maybe a touch of neutral tint. So because the paper is wet, I don't want to be adding a lot of water to this, so it's more pigment than water I had. So that's quite nice. Dry paper there, so I shall leave that. He says, try not to lose that. And I don't normally try to replicate the clouds because, you know, they're so abstract. Oh, so, and again a bit of burnt sienna there, and just some burnt sienna on its own for a warmer cloud there. And again, this is a way to connect the sky to these buildings. And while the paper's wet, we've got time to, you know, do what we need to do up here, and as soon as it starts to dry, you've got to stop. And remember, it will dry a little bit lighter, and what looks like a bit of a mess, you know, probably will dry quite nice if you don't mess about with it. Just a slightly darker cloud in the middle there, maybe a touch of alizarin crimson just to warm that up. So that was a bit of alizarin crimson, neutral tint. The paper's still damp. I think I'll leave that as it is there. So if I wanted to paint these distant landmass and trees, I need to probably wait for it to dry, because if I paint it now, it will come down as well. So I think it's probably better just to dry it off and go again. And as I when I did my large painting the other day, I let everything dry naturally without the hairdryer, and you do get a different effect. Obviously, for these demos, we're time limited, and we can't just stand here for 20 minutes for this to dry. So I will dry it with a hairdryer. But sometimes if you're at home, you could just go and have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and then just come back to it, and just have a look, see what different effects you get. I think you'll find things will soften a little bit more, and you'll get some interesting effects. But hairdryer still works well though. But when you're doing these master studies, if it's, this is an oil painting by Seago, so a lot of these effects will happen differently with watercolor, that, you get this softer effect. So, I won't try to replicate those effects, that I'm just taking inspiration from the tonal values, the shapes. And I think that's what's clicked with me recently, is that just paint shapes and just don't think about the object as it is. That if it's a building off in the distance, it could just be the rooftop catching the light, and you don't need to paint the rest of it. Try to leave more to the imagination, but things need to be accurate in the point of view. Anything that's a man-made shape, the apex of the roof needs to look right, because it will stick out like a sore thumb if it's wrong. But things like trees, they could be any shapes. And boats and things, they need to look like they are sitting on the water. So there's a little bit of perspective and so on going on there. But if the drawing doesn't look right, you need to have a look and just make some adjustments. But if it looks right, it's probably fine. So smaller brush now. I'll use this Skoda. And with these distant fields, I do want a soft edge, which I've got dry paper now, so I won't get a soft edge. But what I can do is just, with some clean water, just run a bit of clean water across the top there. Not too much, just a little bit, because I don't want to disturb the layer underneath. And just take a little bit of cerulean blue. It's mixed in with whatever else was there. And then I'll get a soft edge, which will create distance. And we'll carry that across there. But you see the difference there, where I didn't wet the paper, I've got a hard line. Obviously you could do it afterwards, just to soften that a little bit. And then again, this is an oil painting, so a lot of the effects he's got here will be different to what we've got with watercolor. But I can paint into that, which will create some softness. Bit of burnt umber. So I'm going to finish this side, and then I'll do the other side there. So we're just going to mix on the paper. So the blue and the burnt sienna will create some greys. And again, I'm just painting shapes. This is just long grass. Leave a bit of white paper, add sparkle. I think watercolors with a bit of white paper showing look alive. That should just go in there. It's washed off too much. And some thicker paint, a bit of burnt umber, ultramarine blue maybe, so that will create a nice dark. So this is where we're now going to get contrast, because we've got the darkest dark almost, and because we've got dry paper here, we can get a hard edge, which will again will increase that contrast. So too towards black, so let's just add some brown into there, a little bit more nice on the eye. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just take my spray bottle, and to finish this, just let it disappear to nothing, and maybe even take a bit of water and just soften that edge as well there and bring those reflections down. And that the spray bottle I find is a really good way to paint the foreground when you're not sure what to actually put there. Just let it disappear. That works well, because no one should be looking here, they're going to be looking here. I don't want to make it too warm because it will come forward, so I'll just cool it off in the distance there by adding some blue, and that's fine. That looks okay. Again, we can just, always looks good in watercolour, bringing those down. Not too much. Important thing is I don't lose this area here. We're going to get that strong contrast. And then obviously full credit goes to Seago. You know, this is a master painting, and we're so lucky to have, you know, access to works like this, that you know, with the internet and books and so on, that I started learning probably before well, this was about 25 years ago, so I had library books that I used to get and look at, but now it's just so easy to find these references pictures, and I still find Edward Seago paintings I've never seen before, and there's so many. So I'm going to paint all of this now. It's just one shape. I think the mistake is to think of it as I'll paint these boats, then I'll paint this house, then I'll paint this tree. It's one shape, and we want to connect it all up and mix on the paper. And the best way to do these reflections is to keep it simple. That just fades to nothing. And then I can see a bit of blue. I did a little bit of white gouache in there just to lighten that a little bit. And I say that this is, I suppose, that the version, if you were painting from life and you had these boats in front of you, obviously they would be very detailed in front of you, so you would need to sort of squint your eyes and just look at it as a shape of, you know, all of them together. And you know, that's what this kind of looks like with this blurry image. But as long as we've got those masts and that boat, you know, that's obviously a boat because of the shape. So this is the side of the boat we need to get looking good. So we just paint the reflection of it. So why do I think this is such an important demo to watch? It's because looking at Edward Seago's work, that I know he painted outdoors a great deal, and it's his ability to simplify things, just like what's going on here, where there is no detail, but at the end the painting looks amazing. And again, all full credit to Edward Seago, that his ability to create the scene with just minimal amount of brush marks, whether it's in watercolor or oils. So there's just so much to learn from doing these master studies, and that's how I think I have learned to paint confidently with watercolor. I've still got a long way to go to paint this confidently outdoors on location, but by following his methods, I think I will get there. So let's get on with the demo, but that's why I thought it was so important to watch this one. Back of the boat. Can add a little bit of colour, a bit of red and brown on the side of that boat. And it's just a dark shape in there, you know, just bits and bobs. And then we can connect it to that tree. That boat could do with being a little bit darker and maybe not as bit warmer. Get the shape of that better. And I'm just using paint straight from the tube because the paper is damp here. So I'm just putting a little dark under the boats there. Just soften it a little bit. Probably starting to fiddle around too much. I think the white paper is just a bit too stark there. So I'm just going to take a bit of, I've got some dried up gouache at the top of my palette here. There's some gouache I squeezed out the other day that's dried up, but if I just wet it, it soon comes up. And then I'll just put some of that on there. And actually just let that melt into there. That will disappear to pretty much nothing. But obviously for the replay, I shall just run through the colours I've got on my palette that someone asked the other day. That I've got titanium white up there. I've got neutral tint, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, burnt umber, burnt sienna, Lazarin crimson, pyrrole orange. I've got cadmium yellow, Hansa yellow, either yellow ochre or raw sienna, lemon yellow, cadmium red, and lavender. Can't remember what that is, but it's rock solid, so no good anymore. Although it will wet up eventually, but obviously I'm not using that. But, sometimes I put colours on just for particular demos. So I'll leave a little bit of a white gap for the back of the boat. And just paint that window. And because a boat curves, that it will be darker perhaps at the bottom here. I can just manipulate that a little bit. I don't want to lose the sharp edge at the front there, so be fairly careful. So that'll be fine. So stop messing about and fiddling with things. And we don't need to paint all of this in huge amounts of detail because it would detract away from the whole scene. You know, it's a scene about the whole scene, not just these houses. But we do need to connect it all up, and we can do that by just, it's still damp enough here to paint into there. And I think that's the difference when you look at paintings by, you know, Seago and Sargent and so on. Their paintings have a feel of wholeness to them, that, you know, they're not one object stuck onto another object. And, you know, that's, you know, it's a difficult skill to do, but it's a case of just thinking differently and letting things happen. Take a bit of lavender. And just paint that roof. A bit more water. That one's darker. Again, that's all melting into each other. And that roof top there, I shall leave a little bit of a gap there because I don't want this rooftop to melt into that one because we won't be able to make out what it is. Chimney pot there. Pick a bit of yellow. Just control the amount of paint on the brush. And there's that tree. But again, I'll just paint it into that rooftop so it becomes part of it. And it's quite light, the rooftop there. Again, I shall just use a bit of lavender, which has a lot of white gouache in it, but I've just added a little bit more there. And just paint that into there. Might need to sharpen that edge up a little bit. And my drawing isn't quite right to how Seago's is, but it's not a problem because we're not trying to make a forgery. To there. So we're painting around that boat to create that boat shape. So again, I'll just take care of that shape there. We've got some light on there, and I'm just connecting it all up. As long as these rooftops are there, it'll be fine. It's okay. Maybe just a little tree there off in the distance. Just spotted that Seago did that. It's okay. Do I want another one there? I'll leave it. So, bit of sparkle there will be good. So we'll leave some white paper there. And now we just need to put the dark in here. So burnt sienna, some of that. And not too much water because we need this to be fairly dark here. So it's fairly thick. It still moves about on the palette, but it's not watery by any means. So it will retain its strength. And paint them into there while it's damp. And now we're going to connect up to these boats here. Again, we'll make that boat stand out even more. So because I was messing about there, it's not it's dried too much there, but I shall just wet it. It's fine. And look at those variety of edges, soft, hard edges, a sense of wholeness. You don't know where one shape finishes and the next shape finishes. And Seago was so good at that there's a lot to learn here. And please do hit the like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. It does help the channel to grow. I'm trying to grow this channel as much as I can. So let's get on with this video. So if I do my little trick of spraying a load of water here, there's probably not enough paint there and it'll just be too weak. So I need to load it up with some more paint, and I'll warm it up a little bit as well. So a bit of red. I shall just, because as soon as you start spraying water on things, you're diluting it. So more pigment on there. And then let's just let it run down. And help it along. Combination, we've got soft edges here, and then maybe hard edges. Careful not to get it too uniform. And I think I could lift out a little bit of paint. So if I just make this brush damp, and then so just remember to wash it off when you do that. Right. Could do with, I know from experience this is going to dry too light, and I could do with just getting a dark in there where the bank perhaps meets the bottom of the water. So if I just take some paint straight from the tube, so that was neutral tint into that warm, so this is just paint straight from the tube, because this is you know, quite damp here, so it will soften quite a bit. So just putting in a dark along there, and again, because I've watered that down quite a bit, I shall just put some more in there. Maybe let's just scratch a post in there, which give me something in the water there. So let's dry that off. I'll just take a little bit of white gouache just to perhaps hint at there's a sail on that boat there. So maybe that will just break that up a little bit. And a little highlight here and there. Best not to go overboard. Again, no birds in the sky. He wasn't obviously a fan of painting birds, but I'm going to put them in. There's a nice big area here to put in. Suppose I probably need to put some reflections in. We'll take some clean tissue, just water that down a little bit. So I don't want to spoil this lovely freshness, but maybe just one or two. And if I just touch it with a tissue, it'll be a little bit lighter. Let's take the tape off. So again, you know, it's full credit to Edward Seago, you know, an amazing painting that he's done there. It's so simple, and it was, you know, without sort of trying to sound, you know, cocky, it was easy to paint because he's done the work. That if I was put in front of this scene myself, I probably wouldn't have done it like this, or I wouldn't have the skills to do it like this. But he made it easy for us to paint because he's just simplified it so well that you know, I didn't really paint anything. That, you know, maybe the side of that boat is the only bit of detail, that there's nothing there, but the scene looks good, and it's all about this light on the water here. That you know, that's all I needed to get that right. You know, the rest of the stuff doesn't really make a huge difference. But yeah, no, thank you, Seago. Another painting to learn from. It's the color harmony and the contrast is what's done it. If you enjoyed that and you think you'd like to paint some more full-length tutorials like that, take a look at my website. There's a lot on there with all the reference photos, the traceables, and everything you need. And obviously we've got a members forum as well, so you can talk to me and get any advice if you need to as well. So if you enjoyed that video, you might also like this one here, so give that one a go.